You cut carbs, you ate enough fat, you waited weeks, and still your energy never stabilized. If fat adaptation should work, why does it fail for people who follow all the rules? In this video, we're going beyond timelines and common mistakes to uncover the hidden physiological blockers that stop fat adaptation even when everything looks right on paper. Many people approach fat adaptation with the assumption that it is automatic. The logic seems simple. Remove carbohydrates, increase fat, wait long enough, and the body will inevitably switch over. This belief is reinforced by simplified explanations online that frame fat adaptation as a passive outcome of dietary compliance. In reality, fat adaptation is not an on-off switch. It is a conditional physiological response, and those conditions are not guaranteed just because the diet looks correct on paper. Human metabolism is adaptive, but it is also protective. The body does not commit to a new primary fuel system unless it perceives the environment as stable and safe. For decades, most people's metabolism has been trained to rely on glucose. That system is fast, familiar, and tightly regulated. When glucose availability drops, the body does not immediately abandon that preference. Instead, it evaluates whether the change is temporary or sustainable. Until that determination is made, it often keeps glucose as a backup priority, even if fat is available. This is where the assumption breaks down. Many people meet the external requirements of fat adaptation: low carbohydrates, adequate fat, enough time, but fail to meet the internal requirements. The body must downregulate glucose-dependent pathways and upregulate fat oxidation pathways. That transition requires more than nutrients. It requires a metabolic environment that supports change. If stress signals are high, energy availability feels uncertain, or daily inputs are inconsistent, the body resists committing fully. Another overlooked factor is that fat adaptation is not driven by rules, but by signals. The body responds to hormonal and nervous system signals that reflect energy security. If calories are too low, if stress hormones remain elevated, or if daily routines are erratic, the signal received is not "fat is our new reliable fuel." Instead, the signal is "resources are uncertain, stay flexible and defensive." In that state, the body hedges its bets by maintaining partial glucose reliance, even when carbohydrates are scarce. This explains why some people follow every guideline and still feel stuck. They are doing everything right, but the internal signal remains mixed. Fat adaptation stalls not because the body cannot adapt, but because it does not yet trust the new conditions. Adaptation is a commitment, and the body does not make that commitment lightly. It is also important to understand that fat adaptation is not a single process happening uniformly across the body. Different tissues adapt at different rates. The liver may produce ketones quickly, while muscles and brain lag behind in their ability to use them efficiently. If these systems are out of sync, energy remains unstable even though ketosis is present. This mismatch often leads people to believe adaptation has failed when it is actually incomplete. The assumption that fat adaptation is automatic leads to frustration because it removes context. When progress does not match expectations, people blame themselves or the diet. In reality, fat adaptation is earned through consistency, stability, and supportive conditions, not simply triggered by dietary rules. Once this assumption is removed, the process becomes easier to understand and far easier to complete. Chronic stress is one of the most overlooked reasons fat adaptation fails, even when diet and timing are technically correct. Many people focus exclusively on food, carbohydrates, fats, calories, while ignoring the internal environment those nutrients are entering. The body does not adapt based on diet alone. It adapts based on perceived safety,
and chronic stress directly undermines that perception. From a physiological standpoint, stress is not abstract or emotional. It is a biochemical state driven primarily by hormones such as cortisol and adrenaline. These hormones evolved to protect us in short bursts during danger, scarcity, or intense physical demand. In those moments, the body prioritizes rapid energy availability. Glucose is the fastest, most controllable fuel for survival, so stress hormones are designed to raise blood sugar, mobilize glycogen, and suppress non-essential processes. This creates a fundamental conflict with fat adaptation. Fat adaptation requires low, stable insulin, efficient fat oxidation, and a sense of long-term energy security. Chronic stress sends the opposite message. When cortisol remains elevated day after day due to poor sleep, excessive training, psychological pressure, undereating, or constant stimulation, the body receives a continuous signal that the environment is unstable. In that state, committing fully to fat as a primary fuel feels risky from a survival perspective. One of cortisol's key effects is increased gluconeogenesis, the production of glucose from protein and amino acids. Even when carbohydrates are low, stress hormones ensure glucose remains available just in case. This maintains partial glucose dependence and interferes with the downregulation of glucose-based pathways. Ketones may be present, but they are treated as supplemental rather than primary fuel. Chronic stress also disrupts mitochondrial function. Mitochondria are highly sensitive to hormonal signals. Elevated cortisol and adrenaline shift them towards short-term output rather than long-term efficiency. Fat oxidation is an efficiency-focused system. It produces large amounts of energy steadily, but it is slower to ramp up. Under stress, the body favors faster, less efficient pathways that rely on glucose. As a result, the cellular machinery needed for sustained fat-based energy never fully matures. Sleep disruption compounds this problem. Poor sleep increases cortisol, reduces insulin sensitivity, and impairs recovery. Even a perfect diet cannot overcome a nervous system that is locked in a state of vigilance. Many people trying to do keto right unknowingly stack stressors: calorie restriction, intense exercise, fasting, work pressure, and poor sleep, all while expecting metabolic stability. The body interprets this combination not as optimization, but as threat. Importantly, stress does not need to feel extreme to have metabolic consequences. Low-grade, persistent stress is enough. Feeling wired but tired, restless energy, shallow sleep, irritability, or constant mental effort are all signs that the nervous system is not relaxed enough to allow adaptation. Fat adaptation thrives in a calm internal environment. This does not mean eliminating all stress, but it does mean reducing unnecessary stress signals during the adaptation period. Adequate calories, sufficient fat intake, electrolyte support, lower training intensity, consistent routines, and quality sleep all lower cortisol and restore a sense of metabolic safety. In short, chronic stress acts as a silent override. It does not stop fat adaptation by force. It prevents the body from ever trusting the conditions enough to complete it. Until stress is addressed, fat adaptation remains partial, unstable, and frustratingly out of reach, no matter how perfectly the diet appears to be followed.
Undereating without realizing it is one of the most common and most misunderstood reasons fat adaptation fails. Many people believe they are eating enough simply because they are no longer hungry in the traditional sense. Appetite often changes on low-carb or ketogenic diets, and hunger signals can become blunted early on. While this can feel like progress, it often masks a deeper problem: insufficient total energy intake.
Fat adaptation requires energy to build. It is not just a switch in fuel choice, but a metabolically expensive remodeling process. Enzymes must be upregulated, mitochondria must increase their capacity to burn fat, hormone signaling must recalibrate, and tissues must learn to rely on a new fuel source. All of this requires adequate calories. When energy intake is too low, the body shifts into conservation mode instead of adaptation mode. This problem is especially common because many people unintentionally stack restrictions. They remove carbohydrates, reduce portion sizes, skip meals, fast aggressively, and avoid fat out of habit or fear. On paper, the diet looks clean. In reality, the body experiences energy scarcity. From a survival perspective, energy scarcity is not a time to experiment with new fuel systems. It is a time to conserve, slow down, and rely on familiar pathways, primarily glucose. When calories are insufficient, stress hormones rise. Cortisol increases to maintain blood sugar through gluconeogenesis, breaking down protein and muscle tissue to create glucose. This keeps the body tethered to glucose metabolism even in the absence of dietary carbs. Ketone production may occur, but usage remains inefficient because the body does not trust that fat is a reliable, abundant energy source. Undereating also impairs thyroid signaling. Low energy intake reduces conversion of thyroid hormones that regulate metabolic rate. As metabolic rate slows, fatigue increases, body temperature drops, and exercise tolerance declines. Many people interpret this as keto flu or adaptation difficulty, when it is actually chronic underfueling. Another reason undereating is hard to detect is that fat and protein are highly satiating. People may feel fine between meals, but still lack the total energy needed across the day. Subtle signs often appear first: persistent cold sensitivity, poor sleep, low motivation, stalled performance, irritability, or a sense of flat, lifeless energy rather than true fatigue. These are not signs of discipline, they are signs of insufficient fuel. Importantly, fat adaptation is not a weight loss hack. While fat loss may occur later, the adaptation phase is about metabolic security, not deficit. The body needs to learn that fat is not only present, but plentiful. Only then will it invest in the machinery required to burn it efficiently. Attempting to adapt while undereating sends a contradictory signal. Use fat, but resources are scarce. The body responds by delaying commitment. This issue is amplified in people who combine low-carb diets with intense training, frequent fasting, or high daily stress. Each of these increases energy demand. Without sufficient intake to match that demand, adaptation stalls further. Fixing this does not mean overeating or forcing food beyond comfort. It means meeting energy needs consistently, especially during the adaptation window. Adequate dietary fat, sufficient protein, regular meals, and a temporary pause on aggressive deficits create the conditions where fat adaptation can actually complete. In short, fat adaptation does not fail because the body is inefficient. It fails because it is underfunded. When energy intake is sufficient and consistent, the body feels safe enough to commit, and fat adaptation finally becomes stable, reliable, and sustainable.
Poor sleep and circadian disruption are powerful, often underestimated barriers to fat adaptation. Many people focus on diet and macros while overlooking the fact that metabolism is governed by biological timing. When sleep quality is poor or daily rhythms are inconsistent, the body struggles to make any long-term metabolic shift, regardless of how perfect the diet appears. Sleep is not a passive state. It is a critical window for hormonal regulation, nervous system recovery, and metabolic recalibration. During deep sleep, cortisol levels fall, insulin sensitivity improves, growth hormone is released, and tissues repair themselves. These conditions are essential for fat adaptation. When sleep is shortened, fragmented, or misaligned with natural circadian rhythms, this entire repair and reset process is disrupted. One of the most direct effects of poor sleep is elevated cortisol. Even a single night of insufficient sleep can raise cortisol the next day. Chronically poor sleep keeps cortisol elevated around the clock, sending a persistent stress signal to the body. As discussed earlier, elevated cortisol promotes glucose production, suppresses fat oxidation, and keeps the body in a defensive metabolic state. In this environment, fat adaptation feels unsafe, so the body delays committing to it. Circadian rhythms also control insulin sensitivity. The body is naturally more insulin sensitive earlier in the day and less sensitive at night. Irregular sleep schedules, late-night eating, screen exposure, or shift work disrupt this rhythm. When insulin sensitivity is impaired, fat breakdown is suppressed more easily, and glucose remains the preferred fuel. Even if carbohydrates are low, circadian disruption can blunt the hormonal signals required for stable fat-based energy. Poor sleep also affects mitochondrial function. Mitochondria depend on circadian cues to regulate energy production efficiently. Disrupted rhythms lead to fragmented energy output, periods of fatigue followed by wired or restless energy. This pattern is often misinterpreted as a diet problem when the root cause is circadian misalignment. Another issue is appetite regulation. Sleep deprivation alters hunger hormones, increasing ghrelin and reducing leptin. This can lead to erratic appetite, cravings, or unintended under- or overeating, both of which interfere with fat adaptation. The body becomes metabolically noisy instead of calm and predictable. Importantly, sleep does not need to be severely deprived to cause problems. Chronic, mild sleep restriction, inconsistent bedtimes, or frequent late nights are enough to disrupt metabolic signaling. Many people attempting fat adaptation unknowingly sabotage progress by maintaining stressful schedules while expecting metabolic stability. Supporting fat adaptation requires respecting circadian biology. This means prioritizing consistent sleep and wake times, minimizing late-night light exposure, aligning meals with daytime hours, and allowing the nervous system to downshift at night. These changes do not directly cause fat adaptation, but they remove a major barrier. In short, fat adaptation does not occur in a tired, dysregulated system. Sleep and circadian alignment create the hormonal and neurological foundation that allows the body to trust its environment, lower stress signals, and finally complete the transition to stable fat-based energy.
Training load can either support fat adaptation or silently block it, depending on what signal it sends to the body. Many people assume that continuing hard training will accelerate adaptation by forcing the body to burn fat. In reality, training is not interpreted as effort, it is interpreted as energy demand. If that demand is mismatched with the body's current metabolic capacity, it sends the wrong message. High-intensity training relies heavily on rapid energy availability. Sprinting, heavy lifting, HIIT, and long endurance sessions all depend on glycogen and quick glucose delivery. During early or incomplete fat adaptation, these systems are not yet optimized. Glycogen stores are lower, and fat-based energy delivery is still slower. When training intensity remains high, the body repeatedly receives a signal that glucose is urgently needed. To meet that demand, stress hormones rise. Cortisol and adrenaline increase to mobilize glucose through glycogen breakdown and gluconeogenesis. This reinforces glucose dependence and suppresses fat oxidation, even if carbohydrates are low. Instead of encouraging fat adaptation, the body is being told that survival requires fast fuel. From a physiological perspective, this makes fat adaptation feel unsafe. Another issue is recovery. Fat adaptation requires cellular remodeling, changes in mitochondria, enzymes, and fuel transport systems. Hard training increases inflammation, muscle damage, and recovery demand. When recovery resources are limited, the body prioritizes repair over adaptation. The message becomes stabilize first, adapt later. As long as training stress remains high, adaptation stays on hold. This problem is especially common in motivated individuals who equate progress with intensity. They push through fatigue, declining performance, and poor recovery, believing these are signs of adaptation. In reality, these are signs of metabolic overload. This does not mean exercise is harmful. It means timing and intensity matter. During the adaptation phase, lower intensity movement, walking, zone 2 cardio, light resistance training, supports fat oxidation without triggering emergency glucose demand. As adaptation improves, training capacity naturally returns. In short, training that exceeds current metabolic readiness sends the wrong signal. Instead of saying fat is reliable, it says glucose is still critical. Aligning training load with the adaptation phase removes this conflict and allows fat adaptation to complete efficiently. Electrolytes are often discussed in the context of fat adaptation, and many people correctly increase sodium, potassium, and magnesium when they reduce carbohydrates. On paper, intake looks adequate, yet fat adaptation can still feel unstable. One overlooked reason is timing, not total amount. The body does not respond to electrolytes as a daily total. It responds to when they are available relative to stress, hydration, and energy demand. When carbohydrate intake drops, insulin falls, and the kidneys excrete sodium and water more rapidly. This electrolyte loss is not evenly distributed across the day. It is often highest in the morning, during physical activity, and during periods of stress. If electrolytes are consumed at times that do not match these losses, such as taking supplements only at night or inconsistently, the body still experiences periods of relative deficiency, even if daily intake appears sufficient. Electrolytes play a direct role in nerve signaling, muscle contraction, blood pressure regulation, and mitochondrial energy production. When sodium or potassium dips at the wrong time, the nervous system becomes more reactive. This increases fatigue, dizziness, brain fog, and exercise intolerance. Importantly, these symptoms raise stress hormones like cortisol, which, as discussed earlier, interfere with fat adaptation. The body interprets electrolyte instability as an unsafe environment, not a supportive one. Another issue is hydration mismatch. Drinking large amounts of plain water without electrolytes can dilute sodium levels, especially on low-carb diets. This can worsen symptoms even in people who are taking electrolytes. The problem is not deficiency, it is poor distribution. The body needs electrolytes alongside fluid, activity, and stress, not separated from them. Timing also matters around training. Exercising in a low glycogen, low electrolyte state amplifies stress signals. Even light activity can feel disproportionately difficult if sodium and potassium are not available beforehand. This reinforces glucose dependence and delays fat adaptation. Correcting this issue does not require more supplements. It requires strategic timing, electrolytes earlier in the day, before activity, during periods of fluid loss, and consistently rather than sporadically. When electrolyte availability aligns with physiological demand, energy stabilizes, stress signals decrease, and fat adaptation becomes noticeably smoother. In short, electrolytes can be adequate on paper and still ineffective in practice. Fat adaptation improves not just when minerals are present, but when they are available at the right time, in the right context, to support a calm and stable metabolic environment.
Hormonal and age-related resistance is a critical factor that often explains why fat adaptation fails later in life, even when diet, timing, and effort appear correct. As the body ages, hormonal signaling becomes less flexible and more conservative. This does not mean adaptation is impossible, but it does mean the threshold for change is higher and the conditions must be more supportive. Several hormones influence fat adaptation directly. Insulin, cortisol, thyroid hormones, and sex hormones all play a role in determining which fuel the body prefers. With age, insulin sensitivity often declines, even in people who eat well. This makes it easier for small insulin elevations to suppress fat breakdown. At the same time, baseline cortisol levels tend to rise with age, especially in individuals under chronic stress or with poor sleep. Elevated cortisol continuously nudges the body toward glucose production and away from fat reliance. Thyroid signaling is another key factor. Thyroid hormones regulate metabolic rate and mitochondrial activity. As we age, conversion of active thyroid hormone can slow, particularly during calorie restriction or prolonged stress. When thyroid output is lower, the body becomes more energy conservative. Fat oxidation, which requires robust mitochondrial function, becomes harder to sustain, even if dietary fat is available. Sex hormones also influence adaptation. Declining estrogen and testosterone alter how fat is stored, mobilized, and used. These shifts can make fat release slower and energy transitions less smooth. The body becomes more protective of stored energy, not less. From a biological standpoint, this is a survival mechanism, not a defect. Importantly, these changes do not block fat adaptation outright. They simply mean that the body requires clearer signals and longer periods of stability. Aggressive dieting, intense training, or constant change amplify resistance rather than overcome it. Fat adaptation in an aging body succeeds best when hormonal stress is minimized, energy intake is adequate, sleep is prioritized, and routines are consistent. The process is slower, but it is also more durable when allowed to unfold naturally. Hormonal resistance is not a failure. It is a reminder that adaptation must respect the body's current stage, not fight against it.
The problem of constant tweaking is a subtle but powerful reason fat adaptation fails, even among highly disciplined people. Many individuals approach metabolic change with a mindset borrowed from optimization culture. If progress is not immediate, something must be adjusted. Carbohydrates are lowered further, fat is increased or reduced, fasting windows are extended, supplements are added, training routines are changed, or meal timing is shifted. Each change is logical in isolation, but together they create instability. Fat adaptation depends on consistent signals over time. The body does not adapt to rules, it adapts to patterns. When inputs change frequently, the nervous system and endocrine system cannot determine which conditions are stable enough to commit to. Instead of interpreting the environment as safe and predictable, the body remains in a state of evaluation. In that state, it keeps multiple fuel systems partially active as a hedge against uncertainty. This constant adjustment also keeps stress hormones elevated. Even when changes are subtle, they signal that energy availability may fluctuate. Cortisol rises to preserve flexibility and maintain access to glucose. As long as cortisol remains elevated, fat oxidation is deprioritized. The body is not resisting adaptation, it is waiting for consistency. Another overlooked effect of constant tweaking is cognitive load. Monitoring macros obsessively, tracking ketones, adjusting supplements, and interpreting daily energy fluctuations keeps the nervous system engaged and vigilant. This mental stress feeds back into physiological stress, reinforcing the same hormonal environment that blocks fat adaptation. Many people misinterpret early fluctuations as feedback that something is wrong. In reality, uneven energy is normal during adaptation. Responding to every dip with a change prevents the system from settling. Adaptation requires patience through variability, not immediate correction. Fat adaptation completes when the body experiences the same supportive conditions long enough to trust them. This means choosing a strategy that meets energy needs, minimizes stress, and then not changing it for weeks. Progress often appears suddenly after a long period of apparent stagnation.
In short, constant tweaking does not accelerate fat adaptation, it prevents it. Stability, not optimization, is the final requirement.
Knowing whether fat adaptation is blocked or simply still progressing is one of the most important distinctions a person can make during this process. Many people quit prematurely because they misinterpret normal transition signals as failure. The key difference lies not in how uncomfortable the process feels, but in the direction of change over time. When fat adaptation is still progressing, energy tends to be uneven but trending forward. There may be good days and bad days, but the overall pattern slowly improves. Cravings gradually lessen, recovery improves slightly, and mental clarity appears intermittently before becoming more consistent. Even when fatigue shows up, it resolves more quickly than before. Sleep may still fluctuate, but stress feels easier to manage. These signs indicate that the body is actively adapting, even if it has not fully stabilized yet. In contrast, adaptation is likely blocked when symptoms remain flat or worsen over time. Energy stays consistently low without any good days. Cravings persist or intensify. Exercise tolerance declines week after week instead of rebounding. Sleep becomes increasingly fragmented. Mood becomes more irritable or flat rather than more resilient. These patterns suggest the body is not moving forward, it is maintaining a defensive state. Another important distinction is responsiveness to support. When adaptation is progressing, small improvements in sleep, electrolytes, calorie intake, or training intensity lead to noticeable benefits. The system responds positively to reduced stress and consistency. When adaptation is blocked, these same adjustments produce little or no improvement, indicating a deeper signal mismatch, such as chronic stress, underfueling, hormonal resistance, or constant instability. Time also matters. Progressing adaptation shows change over weeks, not days. Blocked adaptation shows stagnation, despite prolonged effort. If 6 to 8 weeks pass with no improvement in energy stability, stress tolerance, or cognitive clarity, adaptation is likely being actively suppressed rather than slowly developing. The most reliable marker is stability, not perfection. Fat adaptation completes when energy becomes predictable, recovery improves, and the body feels calm rather than strained. Discomfort during progress is normal. Stagnation is not. Understanding this difference removes unnecessary self-blame and helps direct attention to the real blockers, so the process can finally move forward instead of being abandoned too early. Fat adaptation does not fail because the body is incapable of change. It fails because the conditions required for change are often misunderstood, incomplete, or disrupted before the process is allowed to finish. What appears on the surface as doing everything right can still contain hidden signals that tell the body to stay cautious, flexible, and defensive rather than commit fully to fat as a primary fuel. Throughout this video, the pattern is clear. Fat adaptation is not automatic, fast, or guaranteed by dietary rules alone. It is a trust-based physiological transition. The body must perceive stability in energy availability, low and manageable stress, consistent routines, adequate recovery, and supportive hormonal signals. When any of these are missing through chronic stress, undereating, poor sleep, excessive training, mistimed electrolytes, hormonal resistance, or constant tweaking, the body delays commitment, not because it is broken, but because it is protecting itself. The most important takeaway is that frustration is not evidence of failure. In most cases, it is evidence of mixed signals. Fat adaptation completes when those signals are simplified and repeated long enough for the body to stop hedging its bets. This is why progress often feels sudden after weeks of stagnation. The change was happening quietly underneath the surface the entire time. Once adaptation is complete, the experience is unmistakable. Energy becomes predictable rather than volatile.
Recovery improves instead of declining. Cravings lose their urgency. The nervous system feels calmer. The body stops asking for constant intervention and begins running smoothly on its own. In the next video, we'll take this understanding one step further by breaking down exactly how to remove these blockers in a practical, step-by-step way. We'll focus on what to simplify, what to stop adjusting, and how to create the conditions that allow fat adaptation to finish without force or frustration. If you want clear, science-based explanations that help you build stable energy instead of chasing fixes, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next.